of Doliche itself. So, and that is what Michael is presenting today about the results and the excavation in Doliche and the Doliche urban excavation. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Finn, for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here, and it's also very nice that I can co-supervise Finn's doctoral thesis here at Bergen University. So as Finn mentioned, I'm going to present some of the results that we have achieved over the last 10 years in our excavations at the city of Doliche. That's not the most famous city of the ancient world. And the first thing I will show you where we will go in today's lecture. So it's a city today located in the southeast of Turkey, so approximately 50 kilometers west of the Euphrates and 60-70 kilometers north of the modern Syrian-Turkish border. So it's in Turkey. It's nowadays located at the outskirts of a really big Turkish city, Gaziantep, and you see the area of the city here encircled in red. Although it's in Turkey today, it's important to remember that in antiquity and also in the medieval period, this region was considered part of northern Syria. So here you see the mountain range of the Amanus Mountains here and the Taurus Mountains further north that was dividing Asia Minor from northern Syria. So and that's one of the great advantages or opportunities the site offers. So it's one of the few places that still exist, that are still accessible, where one can actually dig in a city of ancient Syria and explore the material culture of Hellenistic and Roman Syria. So here you have an overview of the site. You see this hill here. That's basically identical with the area of the ancient city. So before I start talking about the excavation and the results, I will briefly summarize what we knew about the city before the excavation started. Actually not very much, but it was more or less clear that the city was founded in the early Hellenistic period. That's clear from the name Doliche, which has there is another city of the same name located in Greece, in Thessaly, and like so many other places of northern Syria, which came into being in the early Hellenistic period. So they transferred this urban landscape of northern Greece, of Macedonia, to northern Syria and Mesopotamia, and founded places which had the same names as the cities of the homeland. But otherwise, there is no information on the Hellenistic period, but we know that the area of Doliche became part of the Roman province of Syria in 30 BCE, and then we also could conjecture that the city developed into a large urban settlement under Roman rule. But we also knew that it was from epigraphic sources that the Persian king Shapur I destroyed the city in 253 CE. then it was also clear from the literary sources that the city was a major center in late antiquity. It was a seat of a bishop in the 4th century, was then conquered by the Arabs in the 7th century, became a border fortress, was reconquered by the Byzantines in 956 and was elevated to the rank of a provincial capital in this Middle Byzantine period. Later was for a brief period of time part of a Crusader county, the county of Edessa, and was then in 1156 destroyed by the Zengid ruler Nur ad-Din, and was abandoned. The site was identified only in 1907 by the Belgian historian Frans Cumont. He was not so much interested in the city, but in the main god, in the main deity of the city, which is much more prominent than the city itself. That's Jupiter Dolichenus, the Jupiter of Doliche, and he, for reasons I will not discuss here, he became very popular with the Roman military, as you can see in this map, where all the testimonies of the veneration of this god from Doliche are plotted, indicated, and you can clearly see that his cult was very popular in the border areas and also like in northern Britain. Whereas you can also see that there is not much going on here in Syria itself. So because of the prominence of the cult, Jupiter Dolichenus was always, or since the 19th century, a much discussed topic in research on Roman religion, and that's why Frans Cumont looked for the site in 1907. But he already discovered that the sanctuary of this Jupiter Dolichenus is not located in the area of the city, which you see here on the right, but on this adjacent mountain, the Doliche Tepe. But he didn't find many traces of the sanctuary. So after Frans Cumont, there was also not much interest in the site of the sanctuary before we started excavating there in 2001. So here you see the top of the mountain, the excavation area. So between 2001 2015 we excavated there, but I'm also not going to talk about the results of this excavation. The focus is going to be here on the city, which is located at the foot of the mountain. I mean, if someone's interested in the results of the sanctuary excavations, so the first final volumes finally came out, and there is more to come. Here we see the city area encircled. This is a satellite view of the city area, and as you can probably see, there's not much to see. So the whole city area is covered by fields where grapes are growing nowadays and olive trees, but there are no or almost no traces of the ancient city left on the ground. So you do not see any walls or stuff. I mean, it's the soil is full of pottery and other objects, but there's nothing in terms of architecture really. I mean, you have the necropolis, quarries and stuff in the surroundings, but the city area is more or less empty of visible traces of antiquity. That's also why nobody really cared about the site before we started working there in 2015. Yeah, this the yellow area, that's approximately the extension of the area of the city in the Rome period. So in 2015 we developed a research plan to explore the city, and on the one hand we started with an intensive survey of the city area, geophysical prospections and other prospection methods. So that's something we still continue doing until now. Then we decided to start excavations in two areas. One area here in the southeastern part of the city, where we were able to identify the city center of the Roman imperial period, and the second area further south, further west, where traces, buildings of the late antique city are relatively well preserved. So, and in my talk I will focus on the results of these two areas of excavation. But before I do that, I want to underline that this is group work. So I'm standing here for a very large team. So that's part of the or most of the people, actually, I mean, Finn is not there, but most of the people who worked in the excavation in this year. So this year's season ended in late September, so it's not so long ago. Yeah. So the survey, I'm not going into details here, but we did field walking, what you do in surveys, and then had also sample areas where we collected everything and studied everything. So these sample areas covered approximately 5% of each field. So the results of the survey have also been published already in this first volume of our new book series on the excavations. The results were quite interesting and revealing. So here, for example, you can see the distribution of mosaic fragment finds, and you can clearly distinguish that certain areas of the city that there are more mosaics in certain parts of the city, and this also matches with the archaeological results we have from the excavation. Like here, for example, this is where we have found a church with from late antiquity, and that's where we have a large temple of the Roman period, which we will see later. And this temple also had a mosaic floor. One more example. Here you see plotted the finds of slags, and they concentrate in the eastern part of the city. And now we can, we know that these parts of the city were abandoned in late antiquity, and then this had become an industrial zone. But the survey also provided important single finds. The most important was this one. It's an inscription, apparently, and it's important because it's the first attestation of the council of the city, also of civic institutions, the bullae and the demos. But now I want to turn the attention to the excavation areas, and first I'm going to talk about our work in the city center of the Roman imperial period. Here you have another aerial view of this city center. So we have so far identified three buildings, three large buildings. One is a temple, then a Roman bath building, and finally the city archive. And I'm going to talk about the city archive first. This is also the reason why we started to work in this area, because for a very long period of time, for more than 100 years, in this part of the city, seal impressions have been found by villagers or in illegal excavations, and they have been sold to the to collections and collectors in Europe and the US. So here, for example, you see seal impressions which have already been published in 1940 by Henri Sayric. And now you could ask, yeah, but how did people know that they came from Doliche? So that's because some of them were official seals of the city, and they have the name of the city. And certain types they occur very frequently. And also you have like Jupiter Dolichenus on some of the seals. So they have been known in large numbers. And you can still buy them on the art market. So like here you have a lot of seal impressions which were sold in 2021. So some of you might not be familiar with this group of objects. Seal impressions or these sealings have been used to close documents. So if you have a papyrus or pergament document and you want to seal it, then you take a lump of clay, you take a string and tie it around the document and this lump, this piece of clay. Then you wrap the clay around the strings, and if you have something like a ring, signet ring, or something else, then you can impress it in this lump of clay. Usually these sealings are not preserved because they are not burned. So if nothing dramatic happens, they just disintegrate. But if the archive burns down, then the seal impressions get burned and they get hard. So only if a terrible fire destroys with really high temperatures, destroys the building, you have the archives. Unless you are in Egypt, then. Okay, but so it was clear that there was an archive in Doliche and a big fire. And I just, one more thing, if you look at the back side of the seal impressions, you can distinguish if the document, the original document, I mean they have been burnt of course, but you can distinguish if they were made of papyrus, then you have these kinds of impression. If it's just plain, then it was yeah, exactly, not pergament. parchment. Yes. Okay, so from the villagers, from the village next to our site, we knew where they find these seal impressions, and then that's why also we started working there. That's Finn, by the way. And this is one of the first trenches in the area, and you see it's a complete mess. That's because people have been digging there for 100 years already, and also with extractors and machinery, and then backfilled everything over and over again. So we are basically excavating the backfill of rubber trenches, but nevertheless, by now we have been able to get a rough idea of the architecture of the building. So that's how it looked in September of this year. You see that the foundations are relatively well preserved. So it's a large rectangular building with here I've also like an auto photo and with a reconstruction. So it's one corridor with these protruding walls, and then we have to imagine that there have been shelves here along the walls and where they stored the documents. Although there is not much preserved in terms of architecture, it's an important result, an important finding, because not many archive buildings of the ancient world are known. So there are only a few, many from the Hellenistic period, like the archive of Seleucia on the Tigris, which is much earlier than our archive here. But there are some similarities, or actually it's maybe not so easy to see, but the dark walls here, these are the original, these are the walls of the archive, but you also have a long corridor and with these protruding walls. And yeah, so we hope that we will be able to excavate further parts of the building in the future, and to get a better understanding of the situation, also of the context of this building, which seems to have been incorporated into a larger structure of probably administrative purposes. So the other question you might have now is, but how do we know that this exactly is the archive? When we wet sieved the spoils from the excavations, which is a very time-consuming and arduous process, we were so far able to retrieve more than 6,000 of these seal impressions from this relatively small area from this room. So here you see the seal impressions, or rather fragments of seal impressions of one single day of excavation. And I'm also not going into detail here, but you can, in general, distinguish between the official seals of the city, which are which are larger, which have images which have an official character. Like here, for example, the city goddess of Doliche, which looks like the city goddess of all other cities too, but that's not the Tyche of Antioch in this, but that's the Tyche of Doliche. So that's the most common seal. So I guess so far we have like 300 or 400 specimens of this this seal. But there are also more interesting seal impressions which show the main god of the city, Jupiter Dolichenus, in combination with different Roman emperors. That's something very peculiar, and so that's the type where the emperor is offering something to the god, and the god is crowning the emperor. But there are also 3 types which have Roman emperors shaking hands with Jupiter Dolichenus, starting already with Augustus. But most of the ceilings are smaller ceilings, seal impressions of private seals, which display a wide range of motifs, mainly gods, goddesses, and symbols. What is interesting is that there is among these hundreds of private seals, there's nothing specific of northern Syria or the city. So there is no connection to local religion, local history. It's all very generic. That's the same kind of seals that you find in northern Africa or wherever you have a Roman archive or where you find Roman gems. What we are now planning to do is to put everything in an open access database. This is done by a colleague in Münster, and yeah, we hope that at some point in the near future this will all be accessible. That's a problem with these large amounts of finds. Most of the archives known from the Hellenistic period too, they've never been fully published because it's a lot of materials, and the documenting, photographing, that it's all very expensive and time consuming. Also can show you a recent publication by my colleague Torben Schreiber, who wrote his dissertation on seals and seal impressions of the Hellenistic period, if someone is interested in this material. So then there's the Roman bath, and I'm not going to talk about the Roman bath because I could imagine that Finn has already talked about it to a few of you. So it's so this building complex has been excavated by Finn, and has also been studied by him in his PhD, in his master's thesis, and that's one of the plans that he made. So it's a row type bath building of the Roman imperial period. Yeah, but I'm going to skip that, and I continue with a temple that we discovered only relatively recently, so in 2021. That's actually the discovery that surprised me most in all these years. So here you have another aerial view of the city area. That's the area of the bath building and the city archive. And what we wanted to do in 2020, 2021 is to investigate how this public area, how this was how this extended further west. Before, I mean, that's not so visible here. Before the terrain slopes up considerably, so it was clear that this must have still been part of the public center, but we had no clue what kind of buildings we have to expect. So I think you can see that there is really nothing on the surface. what we did, and we still do, is a geophysical prospection, but that does not work in general at our site. Whatever method you apply, the results will be not usable, because you cannot detect the limestone. It's so clayish and soft that you do not get a response, a signal. So it's just you have massive walls right beneath the surface, but no method can show them. There we did geophysics. That's a georadar, and I mean we saw some structures like this, and we thought, okay, that's probably a large rectangular court, and then there was something circular here. So we laid out some test trenches in 21 to investigate these geophysical results, and in this area where we saw the circular structure, that's here, we were at a depth of 2 meters indeed. We indeed found a bent wall, which was part of a circular thing, and we then extended the trench. Looks very messy here, but that's after at the end of the 2021 season, we indeed had this circular wall and also other traces of really monumental architecture. We found really large pieces of architectural decoration, like this pilaster capital, and yeah, that's what we had then at the end of the season here. This one half of an apsidal structure, then here a pillar with a half column, and then we had a very massive wall here and foundation trenches further east, and this these things they aligned, and after this first season, our working hypothesis was that we have come across a very large cult building temple. Seemed to be a bit far-fetched at that time, but we were right indeed. So after 3 more campaigns, we have now uncovered substantially more of this building, and we are now sure that that's indeed a very large a temple with an apse, interior colonnade, outer colonnades. But I'm going to talk about the details in a minute, because this is important discovery, because there is almost no urban sanctuary, urban temple that has ever been excavated in a city of ancient northern Syria. Although there are so many cities, famous cities, and many of them have been excavated, have been investigated, but most of them have been completely rebuilt, reshaped in late antiquity. So you do not usually have the opportunity to excavate the Roman imperial or even earlier Hellenistic layers. So even at a city like Apamea or Antioch, there are no religious structures, no temples that have been excavated. So nothing is known about religious architecture basically north of Palmyra. at least from urban contexts. So that's why this discovery was very important. And yeah, there are also some architectural features, as you will see in a minute, which are very interesting and surprising. So the first we focused on the eastern part of the temple with the apse, which we this year completely excavated. Yeah, you see here the apse. Then we have two side rooms. Here we have the line of the inner colonnade. And in general, you can see that there is not much preserved of the standing walls. So in most parts of the building, all we can detect that we can excavate are the empty foundation trenches. But these trenches are very well preserved because they have been dug in the bedrock. So the bedrock here is very soft, and to support this massive building, they decided to cut trenches, some of them up to 3 meters deep in the bedrock, and fill them up with ashlars. The ashlars have been removed later, in late antiquity, but you still have these massive empty trenches. What was very surprising is that in the southern aisle of the temple, parts of the original Roman period floor are still preserved, and this floor consisted of a mosaic, which yeah, here you can see the situation better. So they did not remove the mosaic floor because you cannot do anything with mosaics. The central parts of the temple, they had been covered with marble slabs. They have all been removed, but they did not remove the mosaic floor here of the southern aisle. Another very interesting discovery were large numbers of glass mosaic tesserae, and some of them also still sticking in plaster, which clearly shows that these glass mosaics were covering the walls. And so in general, if we look at the decoration of the building, this very much resembles of later churches, basilicas, with the mosaic floors and the general outline with the with the nave and the aisles and the mosaic floors, and you also had a half dome here over the apse. And this half dome probably was decorated with the glass mosaics. Another area of special interest was this southeastern corner of the temple, which we excavated last year and this year mainly. Here things are less well preserved than in the area of the apse, but this area is of great importance because this was the corner of the building, and the results we achieved here, they were very important to establish the size of the building, and also the design of the front of the temple. I mean, it's pretty messy, but you probably can see this corner here. That's the remains of the foundation of the cellar wall corner here, and then you have this is the foundation of the southern colonnade. It turns north in two lines, so you had two lines of columns in front of the temple. And you also have parts of the pavement, of the original pavement in front of the temple preserved here. And this is important because you can estimate the height of the podium of the temple. So if you remember, you had the mosaic floor here in the western end of the southern aisle. So that was the walking level inside the temple, and you have the walking level outside of the temple. And the walking level outside of the temple is 3 meters below the level of the mosaic. So what we have here, because this is approximately the same height as the walking level, is only the lowest courses of the foundation. You have to imagine like 3 meters of masonry on top of that. Yeah. So in general, it's a very large temple for a small city like Doliche. So it's approximately almost 60 meters long and 40 meters wide. So the cellar is 27 meters wide. So it's approximately, well, it's even slightly larger than the Baal temple of Palmyra. So it was a surprise for a small city like Doliche. But that's a good indication of what we are missing in the really big cities. Because if a city like Doliche had this temple of this size, I mean, in Antioch, in the Upper Mare, they must have had much more amazing buildings. We also have most of the entablature of the temple, so it's possible to reconstruct the height of the building. So the column height must have been, also including the capitals, like almost 12 meters. So that's a really big building. I mean, the most striking feature is the apse, because that's something that Roman temples usually do not have. But we find examples of temples with apses in southern Syria, in Lebanon and Israel, but these temples are all much smaller, like the temple, much smaller than the temple that we have in Doliche. And here with these temples, it's also not clear where this tradition comes from of the apse in the temple. And one possible source of inspiration for the southern Syrian temples and our temple is actually Roman imperial architecture, where we have temples with apses, frequently connected to the cult of the Roman emperor. Like the most prominent examples here, the Temple of Augustus in Rome, or the Temple of Venus Genetrix also in Rome. But there are also in North Africa, there are temples with apses that are tied to the Roman imperial cult. So it might be that the Temple of Doliche was for the cult of the Roman emperor, or one Roman emperor, and it might have been financed by a Roman emperor who was maybe attracted to Jupiter Dolichenus and then decided to have this very large temple built here in the city. There is no inscription, nothing that gives us any more clues. We can only say, based on the study of the architectural decorations, that the temple was built in the third quarter of the second century. So maybe it could be a temple for Antoninus Pius or Marcus Aurelius. Okay, so another thing that's very interesting in general is that I mentioned it already with the city archive. The city archive burned down. Everything else burned down. And very surprisingly, none of these buildings, after the destruction, none of these buildings has been repaired or rebuilt. That's also why we are in the lucky situation to study this ensemble of Roman imperial buildings here. Because after the destruction, everything has been pillaged, but you do not have late antique proper occupation here. So apparently there was a violent destruction, and then the city center was abandoned. We can also say, based on find material, that the destruction happened in the mid-3rd century. So we have traces of human presence in later periods, but that's basically or mostly related to the extraction, recycling of material from these massive buildings. Here, for example, we have a large lime kiln from right next to the Bath building, where they burned the limestone. The destruction event can pretty securely can be connected to the Persian king Shapur I. I mentioned it in the beginning, who says that he destroyed the city of Doliche in 253. So in the 250s we have 3 major incursions in the Roman Empire, a very destructive decade, and in his great inscription at Shapur mentions all the cities that he destroyed, and here among them is the town of Doliche with surroundings. And he also says, and people who are of the Roman Empire, of non-Aryans, captive we deported. And that cities have been abandoned after Shapur destroyed them can be seen, and this is known for a long time, for example at Dura Europos. So that was a Roman city, has been destroyed by Shapur and never been resettled again. But here with the cities in northern Syria, it was always well known that they continued to exist. But what we can see now in Doliche, but also in the neighboring city of Zeugma, is that in fact archaeology can show that these cities were destroyed, were abandoned or largely abandoned, and then reoccupied again after a couple of decades. So that there was indeed a gap in the history of the city. So Dura Europos was not reoccupied, but Doliche and Zeugma here at the Euphrates, these cities have been destroyed, largely abandoned for a couple of decades, and in the 4th century became cities again. But at Doliche, at least, the urban design had changed. So the city center was now an urban periphery with industrial installations, but here 250 meters further to the west. I'm very bad with directions. We excavated parts of the Christian city, and the most important discovery here is a large basilica, so-called terrace church. So it's a basilica with with a central nave and 3 aisles. And in addition, what is common in Syria, you have a porticus on the southern side of the temple, and where the main entrances to the church were located. So usually you had 3 entrances at the southern side, 1 for clerics, 1 for men, 1 for women. So the church is relatively large, so it's together with the porticus 25 meters wide, and the length can be reconstructed as approximately 50 to 55 meters. So that's also a pretty large church building. It's comparable to some of the known churches from northern Syria. Of the decoration of the church, the mosaic floors are relatively well preserved, and also here you can see the mosaic floors of the northern of the eastern part of the nave. And when you look at the design of the mosaic, it's a purely geometric design in the so-called rainbow style. So you have the changing certain way of colors changing, which remind of rainbows. And if you look at the design, then you can say that this floor has been laid out in the late 4th century, and there are also there's other evidence for construction of the church in the later 4th century. The church has been renovated a couple of times, and this can be seen most clearly in the area of the apse, which has been elevated over time. So here we can distinguish 3 main renovation phases. So in the first phase, the sanctuary had a mosaic floor, which is still preserved here. Then a stone floor was constructed, and then in the 6th century, everything was elevated by 70 centimeters, and a new mosaic was laid out in the apse. And this mosaic looks very different than the mosaic from the nave. So here you have animals. You have a river landscape, which is a very popular theme in ancient mosaics, and this is, in fact, that's a so-called Nilotic scene. So it's supposed to display the river Nile and the fauna and flora of the river Nile. There here you have some details of the mosaic, which is quite beautiful. Also a shrimp. Another interesting feature of this church and of North Syrian churches in general is that's the situation of this year, so that's clearer. Is a raised platform at the center of the nave. That's the so-called Syrian bema. Much has been written about it. Nobody knows exactly what the purpose was, but that's here apparently the clergy was seated. So it's actually the first time that we have an urban church with such a bema. It's so far mainly known from the churches of the dead cities, the villages in northern Syria, and they have them frequently well preserved. Here you can see how they can be reconstructed. So you had seats. So people were seated here looking to the apse. And then you have a throne here, and it has been suggested that the Bible was or the Holy Scripture was put there. Yeah, that's the bema that we have here now. It's one of only 2 examples of bemata with mosaic decoration. In general, it might be a little bit difficult to really spot the bema here, so because the walls have been robbed out. Yeah, so these were the walls of the bema. That's the interior part with the mosaic. And you can also see that this mosaic of the bema sits on an older mosaic floor. So there was a first phase of the church which did not have the bema. And when you look at the mosaic, at the style of the mosaic, it's probably it's not much earlier than the one of the bema phase. And then they decided, oh, we want to have this bema, and raised the floor of the whole church to accommodate this structure. Yeah, and this year we also continued excavating in the area behind the bema, but this work is not finished yet, so we have to continue here next year. Yeah, the mosaics continue. But there are more very interesting features in this church. Like, for example, you see this line of stones here. So in the first phase of the church, there was a really, you have the continuation here, there was a very substantial step. So this was much higher, the western part of the church, the floor was much higher than here in the eastern part of the church. Okay, so we also found, and that's very exciting, many parts of the decoration of the church, like the wall decorations or marble decoration, champlevé reliefs and stuff. That's something that is missing from the churches in the dead cities, for example, where the architecture is better preserved, but they have never been excavated. So you have nothing of the, or no remains of the the decoration, or not so much. And so also, like, we have a large amount of glass lamp fragments and everything that is connected to lighting of the church. Here, these wick holders for the glass lamps, or here chancel screens, and so on. Another, and that's the last thing I'm going to mention, another interesting thing is, and that's going to be a research project for the future. Another interesting thing is that we have a large building attached to the church, attached to the eastern part of the church, and directly connected to the apse and to the side rooms of the church. So you can see here a large courtyard, and then here a large room with a mosaic floor. Here a corridor that runs into the side room of the church. So this must have been a really huge building connected to the church. So one idea is that this was the residence of the bishop, because I haven't mentioned that. Most probably this was the bishop's church of Doliche, because where you have in Syria, where you have you only have one church with a bema at one site. If you have multiple churches at one place, there is only one that has a bema, and that's always the most prominent church. So this might be a clue that this church was the bishop's church, and then this very large complex, which dates to the 6th, 7th century, might be the bishop's palace. Yeah, so in general, it's a very interesting building that we hope to be able to excavate completely in the coming years. And yeah, that's my final slide. Finally, so that's a view of the city area. It's huge. There's still a lot of work to do, and we hope that we will be able to continue our mission with our partners in the next years, or possibly even decades. But I think so far the results have been quite promising, and also, yeah, for some questions of the history of Syria and the development of material culture and architecture of Syria, quite interesting. So thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. It was a very insightful presentation with great photos, drone photos, a lot of them, I presume.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess I'll start us off with a question, and others can join in afterwards. As someone who's not very familiar with classical archaeology and cities from this particular era, how would you compare Doliche to other cities nearby in terms of size and demographics, and in the Roman Empire in general?
It's in terms of size, it's not a big city really, but it's in the regional setting difficult to compare it, because the urban sites of this area have not been investigated very thoroughly, and most of them now have been inundated by reservoirs or destroyed by the war in Syria. So it was certainly a rather small city compared to other cities of the region. Yeah, in an Eastern Mediterranean context. I mean, compared to cities in the Western Empire, it's not. I mean, the only reason why this city attracted international attention in antiquity was the sanctuary of Jupiter Dolichenus. I mean, I did not talk about the sanctuary. This was an international pilgrimage center. So people came there from all over the Roman Empire, and I mean, this must have also affected the city. This is something that distinguishes Doliche from other cities. Right. I mean, it's similar to Hierapolis, maybe. Or, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? We can start here, I guess, and then.
Do we know what kind of city this was? What was the population? Was it a military colony? And was it exclusively populated by Greeks or even Macedonians?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, if you only look at the literary sources, then you would think, okay, there were Macedonians that have been settled there in the period of Seleucus I, and then this was already a city. But so we do not really have material evidence so far for Doliche having an urban character already in the early Hellenistic period. So I think that this only became a city in the later 2nd century BCE, and the same goes for most other cities of the region. So, and at that point, yeah, and I mean, to make it short, I think there were not so many Greeks. I mean, it was mainly indigenous people living here. You can see it if you look at the sanctuary that we have, which is much older. So there is no interruption or no change in cult activities, in practices to the late Hellenistic period, and then everything gets remodeled. But I think if there had been a major Greek city here in the 3rd century, in the 2nd century, then this would have affected the sanctuary of the city. But everything is the same as in the Iron Age in the sanctuary. So, yeah. So I think it's mainly a Semitic, Aramaic-speaking population. That's also why we have so few inscriptions. They were not very fluent in Greek.
Yes, thank you, Mikael. That was very exciting. And I actually have maybe 2 questions, although they might be partially related. So one of the questions I have is, when you think about kind of continuing with the project, right, are you also looking for or trying to find houses? Yeah. And do you have any idea where you need to go look at all these fields? Or will you keep kind of on the center where you are now?
No. It's a good question. So actually, we have been looking for houses from the start, but then we always found these very big buildings, and which then, I mean, it's all amazing. Also, but also before we found the temple, we hoped that there might be houses, and then it was this really big temple. And but our goal now is to find houses. I mean, since geophysics do not work, it's difficult to know where to look for houses. But but I think here, west of the city center, in this area, we should be able to find houses, because the survey finds, they indicate the presence of houses. We also have here found almost complete window grill of the Roman period lying on the ground, so there must have been something, but yeah. This has also been, I mean, a problem for funding, because when we said, we want to excavate the temple and the city archive, they said, nah, that's not on vogue, this monumental archaeology, you have to do houses. Then they didn't want to give us money for the temple.
The other question I had was about the agora, because I saw you mentioned it, maybe with a question mark, but how much have you found there?
Nothing.
It's the market space, right?
Yeah, but since we have this temple, the bath, and the city archive, you would think, I mean, it cannot have been here, because you cannot really see it in the drone pictures, but it looks very flat here, everything. But it's actually only a flat plateau in this area, and it's very steep in this direction, and there is an edge of like 2-3 meters here, and then it also slopes down considerably. So this is the largest plain flat area of the city hill.
Yes.
So, but yeah,
You haven't
it's
found
speculation. Yeah. We did geophysics, but
And then the end there.
Okay, so thank you, of course, for a fascinating presentation. I have two sort of questions, comments. First, regarding the temple and its dedication. Of course, it's very interesting with the apse. And you, of course, mentioned temples with apses from Rome, and of course, I have to comment on that. So, in Rome, when we have apsidal temples, they are not dedicated to emperors.
no, but yeah.
So perhaps it's different in the East. But it's you. I don't think that you can take examples from Rome's apsidal temples and argue for a dedication to the imperial cult. Of course, you can argue for an imperial intervention or dedication, but I think at least looking at the temples in Rome itself, it's perhaps more likely. Why not a Jupiter temple or something? So that's just a comment or suggestion. The other one is regarding sort of the lack of housing, which I've also found fascinating. That you found all these monumental buildings, but you struggle to find private houses. There's an interesting parallel to that also outside Rome, where we have a series of so-called pseudo-cities like Lucus Feronia and other famous examples, where we have all these monumental buildings. We have a forum, we have a bath building, we have a big temple, we have an archive, but there are no private houses. No one actually lives there. So that's just like a parallel comment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think about the houses. We have indirect evidence of the house. So we have some. Now you can't see it here. Some. Remains of dwellings, probably residential nature, in the area of the temple, which have been destroyed when the temple was built. But behind the temple, some remains are still preserved. So there was something. The area was occupied before the temple had been constructed, and we have a lot of waste material from habitation, like. Butchery waste and stuff. We also have excavated a late antique house. I haven't shown that, or the early Byzantine house. There are many illegal excavations here every year, and there you see. You see things. So there must have been houses. It's just that in the areas where we excavated, we haven't found them really. And the first comment, yeah, you're right. So that's certainly not very. It's not good to show those temples in Rome as examples for Roman imperial cult. I think the argument, as far as I understood, goes that these temples, as imperial temples, then have impacted the provincial imperial temples for the imperial cult in northern Africa and where they mainly there, and also Western Asia Minor. But yeah, I shouldn't show them. Yeah.
I mean, the source of inspiration, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mikael. That was a great presentation. I had two questions, and my first question is also about the temple, which I found it to be a compelling argument in light of the seals with the Roman emperors. I was wondering first why you were so surprised of finding a temple, but I guess is that because of the lack of these urban temples in North Syria?
No, it's just like when you have this huge field with nothing on the surface, and it's surprised therefore because because of the size also. I wouldn't have expected a temple of this size in the city. I mean, it's really big.
And why do you think there was no reuse of the temple? I mean, you have an apse and a perfectly nice big building, and so they decided to make a new one.
It's I have to be more precise here because there is. So when the temple was destroyed, the half dome of the apse and also the roof of the side rooms did not collapse. So, and they were still, this part was still standing, and this part was still standing to the end of the first millennium and has been reused. Because we have also, like, the apse has been separated by a wall and the corridors has been closed off. We also have finds of the Mid-Byzantine period in this area. So, but the rest of the temple has been removed. Also, like this, the massive podium and everything has been removed, or had been removed by the 4th century, because you have because of the finds of the backfill, and then you also have like. When the foundation trenches were backfilled, then you have from very late period, also mid-Byzantine periods, squatter occupation on top of the backfilled excavation foundation trenches. So. You mean why it could have been reused as a church? It's wrong. The mosaic and everything that's clearly that's 2nd century. I mean, with the wall mosaics, you cannot be sure because we only have small fragments of that. But
Okay, well, and my second question is very terrible because I would ask you about something you didn't talk about. So you didn't talk about the Mithraeum in Doliche, and maybe I can ask you to speculate a little bit because it's fascinating with Doliche and Hawara. These are some of the pretty old Mithraea, right? And then you have nearby Comagene where you have these Hellenistic.
I know, but I think the Mithraeum is not very old.
It's not so old?
This was my first campaign when we excavated in the Mithraeum, and in the publication they sold it as a very early example of a Mithraeum, but
you don't
think so? That's based on nothing.
Okay, that's too bad.
Or it's based on a coin, on a late Hellenistic coin, which has absolutely nothing to do with. I mean, it was found in this.
But it's something very striking when you show the map of the spread of the cult of Jupiter Dolichenus. It really matches the spread of the Mithraea, and you know that a lot of places there are like these twin sanctuaries with Mithraea and Jupiter Dolichenus cult. So it seems that there's some kind of relationship between these cults, and so it would be compelling.
It's a soldiers.
And of course, with the Plutarch places the origin of this cult in Cilicia, which is not so far away. So. It would be interesting to speculate more about the sort of relationship between these cults.
It's like, we even have two Mithraea right next to each other. And last year they have discovered another Mithraeum nearby. And also in Zeugma they now have a Mithras temple, or a relief at least, so there is new evidence for
spawning ground of Mithraea.
All right, I think that's a decent amount of questions and nice almost round hour to end on. So thanks again, Mikael. The next archaeological research seminar is in 3 weeks on the 22nd of November. We'll have Isak Roalkvam. We'll talk about shoreline displacement curves. Super interesting to those who are into that. Hope to see most of you then as well. So thanks for now. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.